because like if you're saying give a checklist, there's a difference between handing the kid a checklist or teaching him how to use the checklist. Those are two different things. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of things like that. Yeah, so there's no one right answer. The idea was to get you talking about it. Okay, we do have a little bit more and not very much time, of course. There's always so much to cover and so much to talk about, but I also know that it is in the evening and people have families and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do want to share with you a little bit about reputable sources, reliable sources for your research-based practice paper and for your practice. So in the first part of your paper, I don't think I have anything I have to go there. I think I can go full screen. The very first part of your paper, it says, why do we need to know about research-based practices? Why are research-based practices important? You need to justify this. And one thing you may think about, and you may even want to come right back to this PowerPoint and then think about, here's some bullets. Take it away. Elaborate on this. It's mandated by law. Number 2, focuses on the science of teaching and learning. Research-based practices close the gap for accountability's sake, for professionalism, and for ethical practice. Would you want, let's think about somebody, let's just say your dental hygienist, okay? Would you want them to have read some articles in the Dental Hygiene Journal? Would you want them to know what is supported by research and what isn't? Or would you want them just to go to the internet? And nothing wrong with Wikipedia, but do you want them to get their knowledge from, now I'm going to use one we have, like teachers pay teachers. So, hygienists pay hygienists. Do you want them to get their information from there, or do you want them to get their information from a reputable source? You know what? The reason I use dental hygienists is people always say, you're a surgeon. They always do that. Or a pilot. Do you want the pilot of the plane that you're riding to have, received information from the internet? Or do you want them to have had some training? Do you want them to use the research? Same with your surgeon. Do you want your surgeon to be reading research journals, medical journals, or do you want them to implement practices? But I think even just down to your dental hygienist, I want anybody who is teaching me, if I, even a yoga instructor, I want them to actually know, like, what's the research on that, or what is the most effective practices? I want them to know what not to do, like don't do this because people will get hurt. Don't have them do this. People can strain their neck. Don't do, that kind of thing. I want them to have read reputable sources. I don't want them to be teaching me how to move my body with quackery. So I think it's really important when we think about that for education. So evidence-based practices and research-based practices are two different terms. They mean a little bit different, but for your purposes, it's not anything super critical. But in the literature, if you say something is an evidence-based practice, it has risen to a level above a research-based practice. And evidence-based practices, they have to do meta-analyses, so it's studies of studies. So they gather all these studies and look at the effects and combine them. So they combine the results from different studies If there's enough evidence to exist, then you can say it's an evidence-based practice. And it has to meet the quality indicators. So there has to be enough research and enough research that met all of these quality guidelines as well. There are some practices that are research-based practices that maybe don't have as many studies, but they still have studies. And that's what I want you to focus on. They need to have some research behind it. If your principal says, oh, we are going to implement Brain Gym next week, you want to know, what is the research behind that? Is the school spending a lot of money on this? Are they paying a consultant tens of thousands of dollars to come and teach you Brain Gym? What is the research behind it? So there is a big research to practice gap. So teachers usually rely on the most accessible sources. So if you want to know something about behavior management, we're going to Google it and we're going to look up and we're going to see this guy that says, do all these things. We get something that's the most accessible. We turn to our colleagues, okay? And what happens is sometimes that leads to implementation of things that aren't evidence-based. Teachers do perceive research is important. For the most part, teachers really perceive research is important. But accessibility, that becomes an issue. So practitioners with greater knowledge of research may be more likely to describe methods and procedures that will effectively meet students' needs. So we may want to ask, well, where's the list? I just want the list. Give me the list. What's been proven by research? Give me the list. Okay. So I do have some articles in La Lima under resources. All of you are going to identify one practice and do a research paper on it. I have identified some there, but I also want you to be able to find reputable and reliable resources. So look for these domains. So if you get something off the web, this might indicate that at least there's sometimes org, it just depends, that can be or cannot be, but it tells you that there's like an organization or something behind the article. Look and see if the article, so you look it up on the internet, is it associated with a professional organization, a research center, or a university? And is it in a journal that's actually been peer reviewed? Those are signs that it's a more reputable source. And if any of you want to look up this is interesting too. That article. Interesting. Okay. So here's some of the caution. So you can look up web-based resources that are ineffective, harmful, pseudoscientific. This was very popular a while ago. Have any of you seen this one? Colored lenses for reading. Or they have the put like the paper cover protector that is like, if it's yellow, that'll help students read it better. So yeah, tinted glasses, covered overlays. No research to support that. The keyword method for solving word problems, and we will talk about this in math. It works at the lower grades, it doesn't work at the upper grades, or it works until you run into one of those that's an exception. I like our class member, our new class member here. Hi, Shelby's daughter. Facilitated communication is a huge one. How many of you have you heard of facilitated communication? It has gone into some new iterations, the rapid prompting method, and now it's called same kind of idea, spelling to communicate. It's difficult because what it is for people who are nonverbal using a keyboard to type and communicate. However, is it being facilitated? Is the person guiding their hand? So there have been studies, and they took the facilitator and the person on one side with where the facilitator couldn't see what the person was supposed to type, and they couldn't do it. Only when the facilitator was actually seeing. But it's very attractive. It's very attractive because say you have a nonverbal son or daughter, and now they're communicating by typing. So that's why they're spelling to communicate right now. That it's very attractive. And it's also very much that we need to allow people with disabilities to have a voice, right? So it is attractive. Unfortunately, in the area of autism, there's a lot of these because parents will do anything. Parents are desperate. Weighted vests, no real research to support that one. So there's a lot of those. Brain Gym. Any of you been hit up by Brain Gym lately? That's I think it's a little bit older. I haven't lately, but so the thing about Brain Gym is you go through these exercises and they say that crossing the midline helps to get the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere to work better together. There is testimonial for this. So the Brain Gym, there's like all these people, I did this and da da da, and my son or daughter, they read so much better. So there's a lot of testimonial. And you'll see very strong opinions with these, but there's no evidence. Or very little. It's like what we call the N of one, the personal story or the testimonial. Learning styles. You may have heard a lot about learning styles. So people may have learning preferences, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, right? You've all heard of those. But teaching to a student's unique learning style is not going to improve performance. We need to develop in all areas. And we need to use different parts of our brain for different things. So I hear people still, a lot of time, I'm a visual learner, so I have to learn visually. Well, there are some things that we all learn better visually. But we can't just teach that student because he's a visual learner. We have to give him everything visually. Does that make sense? And we all might have preferences. Okay. So deep pressure therapy, exclusion. Putting kids in the exclusion room, the timeout room. Okay, so anyway, teachers pay teachers. I think there are probably some things on teachers pay teachers that may have, but usually something like this, I don't know. If you found an article that said that lucky little learners had 5 research studies, all high quality, and this really improved performance. Or maybe it's just one of these components that has. So maybe this would be a kit with manipulatives. Maybe it's the manipulatives that have an evidence base behind them. So I don't know if this whole kinder math with mental math and all that, no. But Pinterest, teachers pay teachers, You might find some good things to support instruction, but don't consider them your source of information about what's effective. Find out what's effective, and then if you want to buy some worksheets or some manipulatives from there, knock yourself out. But don't go to them assuming that that is the evidence. Does that make sense? Teachers Pay Teachers has some okay stuff, but okay. These are some places that actually go through and evaluate studies. I am not saying you have to go to What Works Clearinghouse to find out if the practice that you're going to study for your paper has a bunch of evidence behind it. But if you wanted to, you could go to any of these, type in your practice. You could type in cooperative learning. You could type in CRA. You could type in schema-based instruction in math. These are resources. Here are some other. So this evidence-based intervention network, you can look on there and see what are some of the evidence-based practices. I think it's What Works Clearinghouse. It shows up on every list, and it has each one of these you click on, and it has like all these things about science. It is very difficult to read and interpret. So what they've done is they've done multiple studies, like, oh, is it going to go out? Do it real quick. Okay. New share. Okay. So, oh, new share. Hang on. Okay. Are you seeing the What Works Clearinghouse now? No, you didn't. Okay. Sorry about that. Reshare real quick. I want to make sure. Oh, dang it. It's 6. Okay. So what you can do is you can look at these. So they have these practice guides, but you know what? They tell you a lot more about the research that was done to determine if it's an evidence-based practice, as opposed to that. But so say you wanted, so here, strong, if you wanted to find something, you might, this is a promising practice. Here's a promising. Okay. Boom, boom. It went back up. This one provides some synthesis. This one is about more social emotional development programs. I like the IRIS Center. You guys have done lots of IRIS modules. They have all kinds of like synthesis. You can look up something in the IRIS modules and see if it's a research-based practice. That is a very reliable source, and it's accessible. Like some of these others, those documents you saw, it's like a report about the research that's been done on cooperative learning instead of how to do cooperative learning. You should know about those. Here's a couple of other, okay? Now, the last part, I think we will save for another day, but any of these practices need to be implemented with fidelity. Like on the quiz you just did, where you did an implementation guide, it doesn't matter if you choose a research-based practice if you don't implement it as it's intended to be implemented. So along with your paper, you are going to create an implementation guide. Fidelity of intervention, they call it fidelity of implementation, okay? We'll go over this later. I'm going to save this one because of the time. We will do this later. Now, to close class, I will be available. We don't have class next week because we have a face-to-face the next Saturday. But I will be available next week for online office hours. I don't know if any of you, if you know how to access articles through the UH library. If you do already, great. If you don't, we can do that in online office hours, or you can just come and ask a question. But I will be here in the Zoom room at 4:30 next week. And if you want help getting a library guide or something like that, I can do that. Otherwise, I will see you a week from Saturday. I will have all your papers graded by the end of the week. Well, first of the weekend. And good job. If you are not swamped on your other stuff, be working on your co-teaching plan. Get that out of the way. Get it done. Get it out of the way so that all we really have left is that research paper. Okay? All righty. I'm going to say goodnight. We'll do all this later. And I'll see you in a little over a week.
I have some questions after, or I guess you close.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn off the recording.